You think you deserve half? His voice carried across the restaurant, drawing stares. Tessa, you've contributed nothing to this marriage except decorating advice and dinner parties. I sat frozen, still holding the papers I'd received that morning, divorce filings listing assets he claimed were separate property. Our home, the vacation property in Aspen, the investment portfolio, Merrick Financial, the company I'd helped him build from the ground up with my family's connections and my business degree. My 10th anniversary dinner had transformed into my public execution. I watched my husband of a decade, the man whose ambition I'd once admired, whose dreams I'd helped build, dismiss me as if I were nothing more than expensive furniture. Brady, I've worked alongside you for 10 years, I said quietly, desperately trying to maintain dignity as neighboring diners pretended not to listen. I brought in the Henderson account. I secured the merger with, as my wife, not as an executive. He cut me off, signaling for the check. You were arm candy, Tessa. Useful for charming clients, nothing more. I gave up my career for you. A mid-level marketing position? Please. His smile was venomous as he leaned forward. You'll walk away with nothing. I've made sure of it. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that you never saw the knife until it was already in your back? Have you smiled at someone over morning coffee, not realizing they were calculating exactly how to discard you? Have you built a life with someone who is secretly designing its demolition? What do you do when the person who vowed to cherish you instead schemes to destroy you? That night, as Brady boarded his flight to Miami, where his mistress Gina conveniently lived, he believed he'd won. He believed I would crumble. He believed I was exactly what he'd reduced me to. Decorative, disposable, defeated. What Brady never realized was that his cruelty wouldn't break me, it would remake me. His betrayal wouldn't end me, it would transform me. His laugh wouldn't be the last sound in our story, it would be the first note in a symphony of justice he never saw coming. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or betrayed by someone who should have protected you, you'll want to see how this unfolds. Like and subscribe to see more stories of justice served when you're told you'll walk away with nothing, and instead, you take everything. We met at Northwestern's Business School library on a Tuesday afternoon. I was researching for my marketing thesis. Brady was preparing for his finance final. He asked to borrow my highlighter, then my notes, then my number. His confidence was magnetic, his ambition infectious. When he laughed, his eyes crinkled at the corners in a way that made you feel like you were the only person who could make him that happy. We're going to build an empire together, he promised on our third date, mapping out his vision for a boutique financial firm on a napkin. Your marketing brilliance, my financial acumen, will be unstoppable. I believed him. I believed in him. I believed in us. After graduation, while my classmates pursued positions at prestigious firms, I took a mid-level marketing job with flexible hours. Someone needed to support Brady's dream in its infancy. Someone needed to make connections, design pitches, create the brand. Someone needed to believe, unwaveringly, that his vision could become reality. That someone was me. The early years were lean but purposeful. Our one-bedroom apartment doubled as our office. We worked 18-hour days, subsisting on instant ramen and ambition. When Brady landed his first major client, a family friend of mine who trusted my judgment, we celebrated by splurging on a bottle of champagne we couldn't afford. To us, Brady toasted, eyes shining with what I thought was gratitude. To Merrick Financial's first million. The company grew faster than either of us had anticipated. My family connections opened doors that Brady's expertise then walked through. My marketing strategy positioned Merrick Financial as boutique yet substantial, exclusive yet accessible. Brady's financial wizardry did the rest. By our 5th anniversary, we had moved into a sprawling colonial in Greenwich, Connecticut. The master suite was larger than our first apartment. The home office, Brady's domain, featured hand-carved mahogany bookshelves and a desk that had once belonged to a railroad baron. You deserve it all, Brady said, leading me through the house for the first time. The woman behind the man should live like a queen. I didn't catch the subtle diminishment then. The woman behind the man. Not beside. Behind. The trappings of success accumulated. The vacation property in Aspen with views of mountains we rarely had time to ski. The summer cottage on Nantucket we visited perhaps 2 weekends a year. The artwork purchased more for investment value than aesthetic appreciation. The country club memberships, the charity board positions, the social obligations masquerading as friendships. Our lives looked perfect on Instagram. Merrick Financial's sleek downtown offices sprawled across the 30th floor of a glass tower. Brady's tailored suits cost more than my entire college wardrobe. My closet filled with designer dresses for the endless parade of galas, fundraisers, and client dinners where I played my part. Charming, supportive, ornamental. I noticed the shift gradually, like watching the minute hand of a clock, imperceptible in the moment, undeniable over time. Brady began introducing me as my wife rather than by name at business functions. He started excluding me from meetings I had once been essential to. Financial discussions that had once been collaborative became one-sided briefings. "Don't worry your pretty head about it," became his reflexive response to my questions about the business. "Just keep doing what you do best, making everyone love you." When the Henderson family, whose billion-dollar account I had personally secured through my godfather's connection, needed reassurance during a market downturn, Brady insisted on handling it alone. "They need confidence right now, not comfort," he explained, dismissing my relationship-building skills as somehow less valuable than his financial ones. I ignored the warning signs. The separate vacations that became more frequent. The late-night calls he took in our bathroom with the shower running to mask his voice. The assistant, Gina, who seemed to anticipate his needs with suspicious precision. The growing distance in our bed. The life I thought I was building was actually being constructed around a lie. The partnership I believed in was being systematically dismantled. The man I loved was becoming someone I didn't recognize, or perhaps, more accurately, he was finally revealing who he had always been. I found the lipstick-stained collar 3 years into our marriage. Cliché, but effective. Fire engine red, a shade I never wore, smeared across the crisp white fabric of Brady's bespoke shirt. "It's from Cynthia Mason," he explained smoothly. She was crying at the client dinner about her divorce. I offered my shoulder. I believed him because the alternative was unthinkable. Because Brady was smart and successful men who cheated were stupid. Because our marriage was the foundation of our shared empire. Because love had made me willing to accept comforting lies over uncomfortable truths. But then came the unexplained weekend conferences. The credit card statements showing hotel charges in cities where no financial events were taking place. The text messages I glimpsed when his phone lit up beside our bed. "Missing you already. Last night was incredible." When I finally gathered my courage to confront him, Brady's performance was masterful. He didn't deny it immediately. That would have seemed defensive. Instead, he looked wounded, then gradually angry, then deeply hurt. "Do you realize what you're accusing me of?" he asked, voice trembling with emotion I later recognized as practiced. "After everything we've built together? You think I would risk that for what? Some meaningless fling?" He turned it around, making my suspicion the betrayal rather than his infidelity. He suggested therapy, not for his behavior, but for my insecurity and paranoia. He wept, claiming the distance between us hurt him deeply, that my doubt was like a knife in his heart. "I would never betray you, Tessa," he whispered, holding me close as I apologized for questioning him. "You're everything to me." I believed him. Or pretended to. It was easier than confronting the collapse of the life we'd built. Easier than acknowledging I'd been played for a fool. Easier than starting over. The second betrayal was financial, more systematic, more calculated, and in many ways, more intimate than the physical infidelity. I discovered it incrementally, puzzle pieces that formed a devastating picture. The investment property in Vail that I thought we owned jointly was titled solely in Brady's name. The art collection we'd curated together was insured under a trust one had no access to. The joint checking account that once held our shared funds now received only minimal deposits, enough to maintain the facade of partnership. When I attempted to access our investment portfolio to review our retirement planning, the wealth manager seemed confused by my request. "Mr. Merrick handles all decisions regarding those accounts," she informed me. "Your name isn't listed as an authorized party." I began paying closer attention. I noticed Brady taking calls from our accountant without including me. I found unfamiliar paperwork in his home office, offshore accounts established in the Caymans, Delaware shell companies, complex financial structures designed to obscure ownership. "It's for tax purposes," he assured me when I asked. "Perfectly legal asset protection that benefits us both." But the documents never included my name. The protections never extended to me. The benefit seemed increasingly one-sided. I planned to leave then, to consult a divorce attorney, to salvage what I could of my financial future, to escape before I lost everything. I began researching my options, discreetly reconnecting with former colleagues, exploring possible career paths. Then I discovered the third betrayal, the one that transformed me. My grandfather's lakeside cabin in the Adirondacks was my sole inheritance, the only asset explicitly excluded from our prenuptial agreement. It held modest financial value, but immeasurable emotional worth. It represented my family's history, my childhood summers, my roots before Brady. The deed had remained in my name alone, my one piece of financial independence. Or so I thought. 6 months before our 10th anniversary, while searching for my passport in Brady's home office, I found loan documents I'd supposedly signed, taking a $3 million loan against the property. The funds had been directed to a corporate entity I'd never heard of, Lakeview Hospitality Group. Further investigation revealed Lakeview was developing a chain of luxury hotels across the Northeast. Brady was listed as the principal investor and CEO. The business address was the same as his personal accountant's office. The signature on the documents looked like mine, close enough to pass casual inspection, distinctive enough to be legally binding. But I had never signed those papers. Never agreed to leverage my inheritance. Never consented to having the one thing that was truly mine used to fund Brady's secret venture. He had forged my signature, stolen my property, betrayed not just my trust, but the law itself. That night, as I sat surrounded by evidence of his deception, something fundamental shifted within me. The trusting wife who had built a business with her ambitious husband died, and someone new took her place. Someone colder, more focused, more dangerous than Brady could possibly imagine. I looked at our wedding photo on the wall, Brady handsome in his tuxedo, me radiant in white, both of us smiling with seemingly genuine joy, and finally saw the truth. The man I married had never existed. The partnership I believed in had been a carefully constructed illusion. The decade I had invested had been a long con, with me as both investor and mark. "You'll walk away with nothing," he'd said at our anniversary dinner, confident in the trap he'd spent years perfecting. I decided he would be right, but not in the way he intended. I would indeed walk away with nothing of the woman I had been. Nothing of the naivety that had blinded me. Nothing of the misplaced loyalty that had bound me. Instead, I would become something entirely new, the architect of Brady Merrick's complete and absolute destruction. My plan began with a single phone call to Julian Parker. We dated briefly in college before Brady, remained cordial acquaintances after graduation, and lost touch entirely after my wedding. Julian had gone on to become a forensic accountant specializing in financial crimes, a career path I'd once found fascinating, but now found essential. "Tessa Winters?" His voice carried genuine surprise. "It's been, 10 years?" "Almost 11, I replied, keeping my tone light despite the heaviness in my chest. "I saw your name mentioned in that Wall Street Journal piece about detecting financial fraud. Impressive work." Our reconnection appeared coincidental, a charity gala benefiting children's literacy where Julian was honored for his pro bono work investigating misappropriated funds at several nonprofits. Brady, always eager to network with influential people, insisted we attend. "Julian Parker," Brady exclaimed upon seeing him, extending his hand with that practiced warmth he reserved for potential assets. "I've followed your work. That Briarwood case was masterful. Julian's eyes flickered to me briefly before returning to Brady. Thank you. I believe I knew your wife at Northwestern? Tessa Mitchell, wasn't it? Winters, I corrected with a practiced smile. Before I became Mrs. Merrick. Brady's arm slid possessively around my waist. Tessa's my secret weapon. Her family connections opened half the doors in Connecticut for Merrick Financial. Julian nodded politely. I'd love to hear more about your firm. I'm actually looking to diversify my portfolio. The trap was baited, and Brady, with his insatiable appetite for new money and connections, swallowed it whole. Within 2 weeks, Julian was Brady's newest golf buddy. Within a month, he was consulting on Brady's personal investments. Within 3 months, he had access to financial records that would have taken government investigators years to subpoena. It's worse than you suspected, Julian told me during one of our clandestine meetings in a coffee shop 3 towns over from Greenwich. He's not just hiding assets, he's committing serious financial crimes. Tax evasion through undisclosed offshore accounts. Wire fraud. Falsifying loan documents. The forgery of my signature? I asked, my voice steady despite the rage pulsing beneath. Just the beginning, Julian confirmed, sliding a flash drive across the table. He's been moving money through at least 7 shell companies. The hotel venture is just one part of it. I stared at the small device containing evidence that could destroy the man I had once built a life with. Is it enough? For criminal charges? Absolutely. For recovering what's yours? Maybe. Julian hesitated. Tessa, there's something else. Your name is on some of these documents. Not forged, actually signed by you. I thought back to the stack of papers Brady would sometimes place before me at breakfast or before bed. Just some routine business matters, sweetheart. Nothing to worry your pretty head about. He buried them in other documents, I realized. Things I actually did sign. Julian nodded grimly. You need to be careful. Make sure you can prove you had no knowledge of what these entities were actually doing. My second strategic alliance formed through a chance encounter at a women's business luncheon. Meredith Walsh, Brady's former executive assistant whom he'd fired after she rejected his advances, now worked for Harrington Capital, Merrick Financial's biggest competitor. Mrs. Merrick, she acknowledged coolly when we found ourselves alone in the restroom. Please, it's Tessa, I said, noting the wariness in her eyes. And I think we might have more in common than you realize. Meredith studied me in the mirror as she washed her hands. Such as knowing exactly who Brady Merrick really is. Her posture changed subtly, a slight lowering of her guard. And who might that be? A man who uses people until they're no longer useful. I met her eyes directly. A man who believes the rules don't apply to him. A man who deserves consequences. Meredith dried her hands slowly. What exactly are you proposing? Information exchange, I said simply. I believe you have records from your time at Merrick Financial that might be valuable to me. I have access to current information that might interest your employer. Her price was simple, a promise that Brady would face consequences. Not just financial ones, she specified. I want him humiliated. I want him to lose everything. I'm not just going to divorce him, I assured her. I'm going to dismantle him. The documentation Meredith provided was meticulous, 3 years of detailed records showing Brady's misconduct. Client accounts he'd skimmed from. Compliance protocols he'd circumvented. Female employees he'd propositioned then punished professionally when rejected. What Brady never realized was that while he saw me as decorative, his clients saw me as trustworthy. For years, I'd built relationships with the people who mattered, not just socially, but strategically. The Henderson family, whose billion-dollar account was Merrick Financial's crown jewel. The board members' spouses I'd befriended through charity work. The regulators I'd charmed at industry events. I began connecting these dots carefully, cultivating these relationships with renewed purpose. Lunches with Mrs. Henderson to discuss philanthropic initiatives. Tennis matches with board members' wives where conversation naturally turned to business concerns. Volunteer work with professional organizations where regulatory officials often participated. Brady speaks so highly of you. Mrs. Henderson told me during one such lunch. Says you're the heart of his success. That's kind of him, I replied, noting how the older woman seemed genuinely fond of me. The Hendersons have been so important to Merrick Financial from the beginning. Your trust means everything to us. I emphasized the us, knowing that in Mrs. Henderson's mind, Brady and I were inseparable partners. This perception would prove crucial when the time came. While building my external alliances, I was simultaneously gathering internal intelligence. I installed keystroke logging software on our home computers. I photographed documents in Brady's office during his frequent absences. I recorded conversations that seemed particularly relevant to his financial schemes. My network expanded strategically. An IT specialist who had been unfairly fired from Merrick Financial. A paralegal at Brady's law firm who harbored resentment about unpaid overtime. A junior accountant at his preferred tax consultancy who had ethical concerns about certain practices. Each connection formed another strand in the web I was carefully spinning around the man who thought he had trapped me. While Brady moved his pieces across the chessboard of our marriage, believing he was maneuvering toward an easy checkmate, I was playing a different game entirely, one where his confidence would become his greatest vulnerability. You look beautiful tonight, Brady murmured, his eyes appraising the new dress I'd purchased, a designer piece in his favorite shade of blue. I'm glad you made an effort. The Wilsons are critical to our expansion plans. Anything for you, I responded with practiced devotion, adjusting his tie slightly. You've been working so hard lately. I worry about you. Brady kissed my forehead absently. That's why I have you, isn't it? To make everything else in my life run smoothly. Over 6 calculated months, I reconstructed my role as Brady's wife. I became the woman he thought he'd married, attentive, admiring, available. I anticipated his needs before he voiced them. I never questioned his late nights. I prepared his favorite meals without being asked. I wore the clothes he preferred, styled my hair the way he liked, laughed at his jokes with seemingly genuine appreciation. I became, in essence, the perfect prop for his perfect life. And he never suspected the performance. You seem different, Brady remarked one night, studying me across the dinner table as I poured his second glass of bourbon, the amount that typically loosened his tongue without clouding his judgment. Happy, I corrected him, offering a soft smile. I've found my purpose again. His expression shifted from suspicious to satisfied. The Children's Hospital Foundation? I noticed you've been spending a lot of time there. It's fulfilling to help others, I said, which wasn't entirely untrue. The foundation was legitimate, my work there genuine. It provided the perfect cover for my other activities and established me publicly as a woman of compassion and community service. A character reference I would need later. Well, I'm glad you found something to occupy yourself. Brady sipped his bourbon. You've been more relaxed. Less inquisitive about business matters. I realized you were right. I reached across the table to touch his hand. You handle the business brilliance, I handle making our life beautiful. We each have our strengths. The relief in his eyes was palpable. My submission confirmed his worldview. He was the strategic genius. I was the decorative accessory. My renewed docility reassured him that his plan was working, that I was being properly managed toward the outcome he desired. When he mentioned a client meeting in Paris, I suggested he take Gina along. She's so efficient, and you'll need help navigating the language barrier with the French investors. Brady's surprise was quickly masked by rationalization. That's actually a good idea. The Delacroix group can be challenging to deal with. Take them to Lambroisi, I added. Book the private dining room. Monsieur Philippe still remembers when we dined there on our 5th anniversary. Just mention my name. You've become quite the corporate wife, Brady observed, something like genuine appreciation in his voice. I smiled. I've had an excellent teacher. I encouraged his absences, positioning myself as supportive rather than suspicious. When he called to say he'd be staying an extra night in Miami, I responded with understanding rather than questioning. When he worked late, I sent his favorite takeout to the office rather than demanding his presence at home. I signed whatever he put in front of me without reading it: property transfers, investment authorizations, corporate resolutions. Each signature was another strand in the web, another link in the chain, another piece of evidence documenting his systematic campaign to defraud both me and his clients. The more I surrendered apparent control, the more Brady believed in his dominance. The more docile I appeared, the more careless he became. The more I played into his perception of me as decorative and dim, the less he guarded himself against the possibility that I might be neither. "I think we should update our estate planning," I suggested one evening, positioning the conversation between the main course and dessert, when Brady was most receptive to administrative matters. "Why?" Immediate suspicion. I maintained my expression of wifely concern. "The Thornsons lost everything in that terrible accident last month. Grace mentioned they hadn't updated their will since before the children were born. It made me realize we haven't reviewed ours in years." Brady's suspicion faded. "I suppose it's due for an update. I'll have Feldman draw up the papers." "Actually," I countered gently, "I was thinking we might use Patricia Blackwell this time. She helped the Hendersons with their family trust, and Mrs. Henderson speaks so highly of her." Brady considered this, weighing the advantage of pleasing the Hendersons against using his usual attorney, who could be counted on for discretion. "I suppose that makes sense. The Hendersons would appreciate the gesture." What Brady didn't know was that Patricia Blackwell specialized in forensic documentation of financial fraud in divorce cases. What he couldn't have guessed was that she had already been consulting with me for months. I became exceptionally attentive to our social calendar, arranging dinner parties that strategically placed Brady alongside potential character witnesses I might need later. I volunteered us to host charity events where his public behavior, including his flirtations with younger women, would be observed by credible community members. When he complained about the intrusions, I soothed him with flattery. "Everyone wants to be close to success, Brady. You're the man they all admire." His ego, properly stroked, rarely questioned my motives. All the while, Julian continued gathering financial evidence, Meredith provided historical context, and Patricia built the legal framework for what would come. I maintained regular communication with all three using a burner phone purchased with cash and kept in a locker at the gym Brady had never once visited. "You're taking a significant risk," Julian warned during one of our clandestine meetings. "If Brady discovers what you're doing before everything is in place." "He won't," I said with certainty. "Brady sees exactly what he expects to see: a decorative, dependent wife who exists to enhance his image. He's never actually seen me. That blindness would be his undoing." 6 months into my performance as the perfect wife, Brady had never been more confident in his control over me, our marriage, and his financial empire. His offshore accounts had grown. His secret hotel venture was breaking ground on 3 new properties. His plan to divorce me once he'd secured all assets safely beyond my reach was proceeding exactly as he'd intended. Or so he believed. In reality, each day brought me closer to execution. Each night that Brady slept peacefully beside me, believing himself secure in his dominance, I mentally reviewed the evidence against him, the timeline I'd established, the allies I'd positioned strategically throughout his life. "You seem so content lately," Brady observed one evening as we prepared for bed. "It's nice to see you settled." I smiled, thinking of how utterly unsettled his world would soon become. "I'm exactly where I need to be." For perhaps the first time in our marriage, I had spoken a complete and absolute truth. The execution phase began at exactly 3:17 a.m. on October 12th. The timing was deliberate. Brady was in Miami with Gina, having left the previous afternoon for what he'd called crucial investor meetings. The weather was clear, reducing the risk of flight delays that might bring him home prematurely. The date fell 3 days after the quarterly financial reporting deadline, ensuring all documentation would be current and comprehensive. I initiated the first action from our home office, using access credentials Julian had helped me obtain. In precisely coordinated transfers, I moved $24.6 million from Brady's hidden accounts to untraceable cryptocurrency wallets. Not to keep, that would make me no better than him, but to document. Every transaction, every hidden dollar now had a paper trail leading back to his financial crimes. Each transfer was screenshotted, logged, and transmitted to a secure server accessible only to my legal team. The money would eventually be returned to its rightful owners, clients Brady had defrauded, tax authorities he'd evaded, and yes, to me for the inheritance property he'd leveraged without consent. By 5:45 a.m., as dawn broke over Greenwich, I had completed the digital phase of documentation. I dressed carefully in a conservative navy suit, the armor of respectable corporate America, applied subtle makeup, and styled my hair in a professional updo. The image reflected in my mirror was not Brady's trophy wife, but a competent business executive. It was time the world saw the woman he never had. At 6:30 a.m., Patricia Blackwell's associate arrived to collect physical evidence I'd gathered, original documents showing Brady's forgery of my signature, records of transfers from client accounts to his personal holdings, documentation of the systematic removal of my name from assets. By 7 a.m., evidence packages had been electronically submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and the State Attorney General. The documentation was meticulous, the narrative compelling, a financial advisor systematically defrauding clients, evading taxes, and committing multiple acts of wire fraud and forgery. The whistleblower protections were in place. The immunity agreements negotiated. At 7:30 a.m., I made my first external call to Margaret Henderson, not her husband. Women in wealthy families are often underestimated, their influence unacknowledged. Brady had always dealt exclusively with William Henderson, dismissing Margaret as irrelevant to financial decisions. This was perhaps his most consequential miscalculation. "Margaret, it's Tessa," I said when she answered, allowing genuine distress to color my voice. "I need to speak with you about something urgent. Something I've just discovered about some of your accounts at Merrick Financial." Margaret's concern was immediate. "Tessa, dear, what's happened?" "I've found irregularities," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Transactions I can't explain. William's accounts showing withdrawals that don't match your lifestyle patterns. I'm afraid something's very wrong. Should I get William?" Alarm now evident in her voice. "Perhaps we could look at the documentation together first?" "I'm not entirely certain what I'm seeing, but as a friend, I felt I needed to alert you immediately." 20 minutes later, I was seated in the Hendersons' breakfast room, spreading financial statements across their antique table. The evidence was irrefutable, subtle, but persistent skimming from their accounts, disguised as management fees, but flowing into Brady's offshore holdings. By 8:15 a.m., William Henderson had called an emergency meeting with his personal attorney, begun the process of withdrawing all funds from Merrick Financial, and initiated fraud complaints with both regulatory authorities and the police. "I trusted that boy," William said, his face flushed with anger. "We treated him like family." "I did too," I replied softly, allowing a single tear to fall. The sincerity of my shock was entirely genuine, just delayed by 6 months of careful planning. At 9 a.m. sharp, I arrived at Merrick Financial's board meeting. As Brady's wife, my presence was unusual but not unprecedented. I had occasionally attended strategic planning sessions in the early years, before Brady began systematically excluding me from the business aspects of our life together. Tessa, Gerald Robertson, the board chairman, greeted me with surprise. "Brady didn't mention you'd be joining us today." "Brady doesn't know I'm here," I replied calmly. But what I have to share couldn't wait for his return from Miami. For the next 40 minutes, I presented evidence that Brady had been embezzling from the company for years. The documentation was comprehensive: transfers to personal accounts disguised as business expenses, client funds diverted to his private ventures, fraudulent invoices from shell companies he controlled. As his wife, I feel morally obligated to bring this to your attention, I concluded, maintaining the persona of the reluctant whistleblower. I discovered these discrepancies while reviewing our personal finances and recognized the potential liability for the board if these activities continued unchecked. By noon, the board had voted unanimously to suspend Brady pending full investigation, to cooperate fully with any regulatory inquiries, and to appoint an interim CEO, their CFO, Michael Lawson, who had always treated me with respect and who, not coincidentally, harbored long-standing resentment toward Brady for taking credit for his financial strategies. At 1:30 p.m., I had lunch with our neighbor, Judge Caroline Wright, not to discuss Brady's case specifically, which would be improper, but to ensure visibility as a distraught wife grappling with devastating revelations. The narrative needed to be established publicly. I was the victim, not the architect, of what was unfolding. At 2 p.m., accompanied by Patricia Blackwell, I filed for divorce, citing not just infidelity but criminal financial misconduct. The prenuptial agreement included a morality clause, a standard provision Brady had insisted upon to protect himself from any theoretical impropriety on my part. That same clause now invalidated the agreement's protections when applied to his actual misconduct. We're requesting an emergency hearing for temporary financial support, Patricia informed me as we left the courthouse. Given the evidence of financial crimes involving your personal assets, the judge is likely to freeze accounts, but provide you with living expenses from uncontested funds. At 3:15 p.m., I met with a locksmith at our home. All locks were changed, security codes updated, and biometric access reconfigured to exclude Brady. I had already removed or secured items of particular personal value, family photographs, jewelry inherited from my grandmother, personal correspondence predating our marriage. At 4:30 p.m., while federal agents executed search warrants at Brady's office, I sat with a professional organizer in our home office, methodically documenting every file, every record, every potential piece of evidence before federal authorities would inevitably expand their search to include our residence. You're remarkably calm, the organizer observed as we cataloged the contents of Brady's desk. Shock, probably, I replied, maintaining the facade of the stunned wife. I still can't believe this is happening. But I could believe it. I had orchestrated it. I had transformed from victim to strategist without Brady ever suspecting the metamorphosis. Flight tracking showed Brady's return from Miami scheduled for 7:12 p.m. I positioned myself in our bedroom, now my bedroom, with a clear view of the circular driveway. Exactly on schedule, a black sedan turned into our street, followed immediately by 3 unmarked federal vehicles. The timing was exquisite, as if choreographed. Brady emerged from the car, garment bag slung over his shoulder, his posture radiating the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable. He was halfway to the front door when the federal agents intercepted him. Even from a distance, I could read the progression of emotions across his face. Confusion, then indignation, then dawning horror as handcuffs were produced and Miranda rights recited. His head whipped toward our home, toward the window where I stood watching, as if suddenly sensing the true source of his downfall. Our eyes met across the distance. In that moment, I allowed the mask to drop completely. I wanted him to see, truly see, the woman he had underestimated. The woman he had betrayed. The woman who had engineered his complete destruction. Brady's face contorted with rage and disbelief as the agents guided him into a waiting vehicle. He hadn't seen me coming. He never had. The sedan that had delivered him pulled away, driver clearly eager to avoid involvement. Later, I would learn that Gina had remained in Miami, having been quietly informed of pending legal actions against Brady. She would subsequently negotiate immunity in exchange for testimony about his financial crimes and inappropriate workplace conduct. As the federal vehicles disappeared from view, I closed the curtains on the tableau of Brady's arrest. The first phase of execution was complete, precisely as planned, down to the minute. My phone began ringing immediately, board members, business associates, social acquaintances all seeking confirmation of rumors already racing through Greenwich's elite circles. I let each call go to voicemail. There would be time for the public performance of shocked and grieving wife tomorrow. Tonight was for acknowledgement. For completion. For the private satisfaction of knowing that the man who had laughed in my face and told me I would walk away with nothing had just lost everything. I poured a single glass of champagne, the same vintage Brady, and I had shared to celebrate Merrick Financial's first million and raised it in solitary toast. To careful planning, I whispered to the empty room. And to consequences. The media descended like vultures on fresh carrion. Merrick Financial Scandal Rocks Wall Street, screamed the headlines. Financial news channels ran continuous coverage, dissecting each new revelation with breathless intensity. Business publications that had once featured Brady as a financial wunderkind now labeled him a predatory fraudster. Social media exploded with memes, hot takes, and armchair analysis. Merrick's meteoric rise built on quicksand of fraud. Financial advisor to the elite charged in massive embezzlement scheme. Greenwich power couple's perfect life unravels amid criminal investigation. I monitored it all from the controlled environment of the Four Seasons in Manhattan. A strategic choice that positioned me as both removing myself from the Greenwich gossip mill and remaining accessible to investigators who needed further statements or documentation. My burner phone buzzed with updates from Julian. FBI seized servers at the Miami office. They're finding even more than we anticipated. From Patricia, judge granted emergency asset protection order. You'll have access to operating funds while everything else remains frozen. From Meredith, 3 more women from Merrick Financial have come forward with harassment allegations. HR director resigned this morning. The web of consequences expanded beyond even my meticulous planning. Former clients filed lawsuits. Regulators launched industry-wide investigations. Business partners scrambled to distance themselves. The Lakeview Hotel properties halted construction. Gina sold her story to a tabloid for a reported 6 figures. 3 other mistresses followed suit, each account more damaging than the last. I gave exactly 1 interview to a respected financial journalist known for thoughtful analysis rather than sensationalism. We met in the hotel's private dining room, away from prying eyes and cameras. I wore subdued colors, minimal makeup, and my grandmother's simple pearl necklace, the picture of dignified suffering. Mrs. Merrick, she began. Winters, I corrected gently. I've reverted to my maiden name. The journalist nodded, recalibrating. Ms. Winters, can you tell me when you first became aware of your husband's alleged financial improprieties? I allowed my hands to tremble slightly as I reached for my water. It was devastating. I was reviewing some family finances, trying to organize for our tax preparation, when I noticed discrepancies in accounts connected to my inheritance property. A property my grandfather left me that held tremendous sentimental value. The lakeside cabin that was mortgaged without your knowledge? I nodded, eyes downcast. I discovered loan documents with what appeared to be my signature, but I had never signed them. Never authorized any loan against that property. When I began investigating, I found much more than I ever imagined possible. You took your findings directly to authorities? And to the board of directors, I confirmed. As painful as it was personally, I couldn't in good conscience allow clients, many of whom had become friends over the years, to continue being defrauded. The interview continued in this vein, the reluctant whistleblower, the betrayed wife, the ethical person caught in an impossible situation. The public embraced this narrative eagerly. Comment sections overflowed with support. So brave to come forward against her own husband. Imagine discovering the person you trusted most was a criminal. This woman deserves a medal for stopping him before more people lost their life savings. No one questioned how I'd accessed accounts I shouldn't have known existed. How I'd obtained passwords to systems I'd supposedly never used. How I'd coordinated multiple federal investigations simultaneously. They saw only what I presented, a victim finding justice. Brady, denied bail as a flight risk, watched from a detention center as I was appointed interim CEO of Merrick Financial to stabilize the company during this transition period. The board's unanimous vote reflected their understanding that clients trusted me, that I possessed detailed knowledge of operations, and that my apparent victimhood made me the perfect public face for a company in crisis. My first official act was to propose renaming the firm. The Merrick name has been irreparably damaged, I explained to the board. Our priority must be protecting client assets and confidence. Within a week, signage was being replaced, letterhead redesigned, marketing materials rewritten. Merrick Financial would become Parker Winters Financial, a nod to Julian, who joined as CFO, and my reclaimed identity. The company Brady had built, that bore his name, would soon erase all evidence of his existence. The new firm announced enhanced ethical oversight, transparent fee structures, and client-centered investment strategies. We established a restitution fund for those harmed by Brady's actions. We implemented protections against similar frauds recurring. We positioned ourselves as the phoenix rising from the ashes of Brady's corruption. 2 weeks after his arrest, I visited Brady in detention. The guard led me to a sterile visitation room with metal tables bolted to the floor and uncomfortable plastic chairs. Brady appeared wearing standard-issue beige, his expensive haircut growing out awkwardly, designer stubble replaced by actual stubble. His eyes, once sharp with ambition, now held the hollow look of a man watching his life disintegrate. How? He asked when they brought him out, voice hoarse from disuse or perhaps from rage. Just that single word. I studied him across the table, allowing myself to really see the man I'd once believed was my partner, my future, my everything. How small he seemed now. How ordinary. You taught me, I replied calmly, maintaining steady eye contact. Every time you lied, every time you cheated, every time you stole, you showed me exactly who you were. I simply paid attention. Brady's joy tightened. This company was my life. No, it was our life, I corrected him. You just forgot the our part. He leaned forward, desperation etching lines around his mouth that hadn't been there a month ago. Tessa, you've made your point. Help me fix this. The evidence you manufactured. I manufactured nothing, I interrupted, my voice cooling several degrees. Every document is authentic. Every transaction real. Every signature verified. You did this, Brady. I merely exposed it. For revenge. For justice, I countered. For every time you dismissed me. For every account you put in your name only. For every woman you slept with while I built your business. For every dollar of my inheritance you stole. He studied me, perhaps truly seeing me for the first time in our relationship. The calculating intelligence he'd overlooked. The determination he'd dismissed. The opponent he'd never considered. What happens now, he asked, something like resignation in his voice. You'll face trial for 47 federal charges. Your legal team estimates 20 to 30 years. I gathered my purse, preparing to leave. I'll be running the company. You planned this from the beginning, he whispered, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. From the day we met. No, I corrected him, standing. I planned this from the day you laughed in my face and said I'd walk away with nothing. As I moved toward the door, he called after me, voice cracking with what might have been genuine emotion for the first time in our relationship. I still love you. I turned back, allowing myself one moment of complete honesty. I don't think you ever did. 6 months later, Brady accepted a plea deal. 18 years in federal prison, forfeiture of all assets, restitution exceeding $40 million. The man who had once commanded boardrooms and ballrooms would now share a cell with white-collar criminals he had previously dismissed as sloppy amateurs. The plea agreement avoided a public trial that would have further exposed his crimes, his affairs, his systematic deception. For this minimal mercy, Brady surrendered everything: his freedom, his wealth, his reputation, his future. Everything except the truth of what had happened, that his destruction had been meticulously orchestrated by the woman he had fatally underestimated. I should have felt triumphant. The company thrived under new leadership, my leadership. Assets under management rebounded, then grew beyond pre-scandal levels as our transparent approach attracted clients disillusioned with traditional financial advisories. The Greenwich house, now legally mine, had been completely redesigned, every trace of Brady erased. My professional reputation soared as business publications featured profiles of the whistleblower CEO who had transformed industry practices. Brady's betrayals had been avenged thoroughly, publicly, completely. I had everything I'd fought for. Yet emptiness expanded within me like a physical presence, a void where satisfaction should have resided. The cold calculation that had driven me for months, that had transformed me from victim to victor, had burned away something essential. Something human. I recognized it first in social situations. Friends who had initially rallied around me with sympathy and support began declining invitations. Conversations grew stilted, uncomfortable. Eye contact became fleeting. Is everything all right? I asked Lindsay, my oldest friend from college, after she made an excuse to cut short our lunch for the third consecutive time. She hesitated, fidgeting with her napkin. You've changed, Tessa. There's something different about you now. I've been through a trauma, I defended. Of course I've changed. It's not that. She looked uncomfortable but pressed on. It's like you're calculating everything. Measuring every word, every interaction. I never know if I'm talking to my friend or to some CEO persona you've created. I dismissed her concerns, attributed them to discomfort with my new status. But similar reactions came from family members who had initially supported me unquestioningly. Maybe you should consider therapy, my sister suggested during a weekend visit. You seem fixated on Brady still. On what he did. I'm not fixated, I insisted. I'm dealing with the aftermath of his crimes. The way you talk about it, though. She looked worried. It's like you're describing a military campaign, not a personal tragedy. There's no emotion, just strategy and outcomes. Even my mother, who had never questioned my decisions before, expressed concern. This obsession with justice, with making sure everyone connected to Brady pays, it's not healthy, sweetheart. At some point, you need to let go and rebuild. But I couldn't let go. The mechanism I'd built inside myself had no off switch. Julian was the first ally to withdraw. What had begun as professional collaboration had evolved into something more personal as we worked together at Parker Winters Financial. I'd believed we might build something genuine from the ashes of my marriage, something based on mutual respect and shared values. I can't do this anymore, he said one evening as we worked late in my office. The constant investigations into Brady's former associates. The punitive rate increases for clients who stood by him initially. The background checks on everyone who ever shook his hand. We need to ensure the company is completely purged of his influence, I explained, confused by his reluctance. That no one connected to his schemes remains in positions to harm our clients. That was true 6 months ago. Now it's become something else. Julian closed the file he'd been reviewing. You've moved beyond protection into punishment. Beyond justice into vengeance. I'm bringing accountability to people who deserve it, I replied, feeling a familiar coldness settle into my chest. No, you're punishing anyone connected to Brady because you can't let go of your pain. He shook his head, gathering his things. This isn't justice anymore, Tessa. It's vengeance. And it's consuming you. You're overreacting, I said dismissively. Am I? When was the last time you talked about anything other than Brady's crimes or your next strategic move? When did you last mention a book you enjoyed or a place you wanted to visit or anything that normal people care about? I had no answer. Those parts of me seemed distant, inaccessible, as if they belonged to another woman, the woman I'd been before Brady's betrayal had transformed me. I care about you, Julian said more gently. But I can't watch you hollow yourself out like this. If you decide there's more to life than this crusade, call me. After he left, I stood in my redesigned living room, surrounded by evidence of my victory. The house, the company, the reputation, the power. I had everything, and nothing. On the first anniversary of Brady's arrest, I received a letter from prison. His handwriting, once confident and flowing, had become cramped and uncertain. "I won't waste time with apologies you wouldn't believe," he wrote. "But I will say this. I destroyed what we could have been. But you've destroyed yourself in response. Neither of us won, Tessa. We've both lost everything that mattered." I crumpled the letter, tossed it into the fire, watched the edges blacken and curl. But I couldn't dismiss the truth in his words. What had I become? The woman who had entered this battle was gone, replaced by someone harder, colder, focused solely on consequences rather than possibilities. I'd achieved complete victory over Brady, but in doing so, had surrendered something of myself. That night, I walked through my empty house, my trophy from a war I'd decisively won, and felt nothing. The redesigned spaces reflected a woman I no longer recognized. The carefully curated art spoke to tastes I no longer felt. The pristine rooms echoed with a silence no victory could fill. I opened my laptop and began what had become my nightly ritual, investigating anyone who had ever been connected to Brady. Former clients who had remained loyal too long. Business partners who had defended him initially. Social acquaintances who had questioned the severity of his punishment. My list of targets had grown increasingly tangential. The decorator who had designed Brady's office. The tailor who had made his suits. The barista who had served him coffee each morning and admitted to missing his generous tips. Tonight, I focused on one of Brady's former partners, a man named Robert Keller who had left Merrick Financial 3 years earlier after a dispute over client management practices. He'd testified against Brady, confirming irregularities he'd observed before his departure, but I remained convinced he must have been more deeply involved. As I dug into Keller's financial records, obtained through methods that existed in legal gray areas, I discovered something unexpected, evidence linking his new firm to international money laundering operations. The scope was massive, involving politicians, foreign dignitaries, even intelligence operatives. This was far beyond Brady's relatively straightforward fraud and embezzlement. This was systemic corruption on a global scale. Information this explosive couldn't simply be turned over to authorities. It had to be leveraged properly. I spent weeks organizing the documentation, building the narrative, identifying the key players. This would be my new purpose, exposing corruption beyond Brady's relatively small circle, bringing accountability to a broader system. I didn't realize I'd triggered sophisticated monitoring systems until it was too late. The warning came from an unexpected source, a federal agent who'd worked the original case against Brady. Ms. Winters. His voice was urgent, professional. "We need to talk. Not over the phone. Today." We met in a nondescript coffee shop in Stamford, far from my usual haunts. Agent Donovan was mid-40s, with the unremarkable appearance of someone professionally trained to blend in. "They know you have the files," he said without preamble, voice low but intense. "The Keller investigation. The offshore accounts. The political connections." I maintained my composure. "I'm not sure what you're referring to." "Yes, you are. No room for pretense. You access servers you shouldn't have been able to find, let alone penetrate. You downloaded files that don't officially exist. You've been compiling evidence against people who don't appear in any public record. If I hypothetically had such information, wouldn't that be helpful to law enforcement?" I countered. "Under normal circumstances, yes." Donovan leaned closer. "These aren't normal circumstances. These aren't people who file lawsuits, Ms. Winters. They solve problems permanently." The clinical way he said it, "solve problems permanently," sent ice through my veins. Who exactly are we talking about? People several levels above my pay grade. People who notice when someone starts connecting dots they've spent billions keeping separate. He glanced around the cafe. "You need to disappear. Now. Today. Before they realize I'm warning you." I almost laughed. "That's a bit dramatic, don't you think? I'm the CEO of a major financial firm. I can't just disappear. Then you need to destroy everything you've found and pray they believe you haven't backed it up somewhere." His expression was deadly serious. "This isn't your husband's fraud case, Ms. Winters. This is something that could destabilize governments. They don't allow loose ends." I didn't fully believe him, but I wasn't foolish enough to dismiss the warning entirely. I thanked him for his concern, promised to be careful, and left. Upon returning home, I immediately initiated my contingency protocol, encrypting files, booking flights under an alias, transferring funds to accounts only I could access. Paranoid, perhaps, but the skills I'd developed dismantling Brady had taught me to prepare for worst-case scenarios. But I'd underestimated their reach and their efficiency. 3 men in dark suits appeared at my door that evening. Their credentials seemed authentic: Homeland Security, Treasury Department, National Security Agency. Their manner was professional, but left no room for refusal. "Just a few questions about some financial discrepancies," the leader said smoothly when I hesitated at the threshold. I knew better than to resist. These weren't local police or FBI agents focusing on a specific case. These were fixers for people who operated beyond normal jurisdictions and conventional oversight. "Of course," I replied, inviting them in with surface-level politeness. "Would you like coffee?" "That won't be necessary," the second man said. "This shouldn't take long." As they escorted me to a waiting car moments later, I realized the supreme irony of my situation. I'd orchestrated Brady's downfall so perfectly that I'd inadvertently exposed myself to much more dangerous players in a much larger game. The facility they brought me to was unmarked, somewhere in Virginia. The questions lasted for hours. They knew everything, not just about the money laundering evidence I'd uncovered, but about my methodical destruction of Brady's life. They had recordings of conversations I'd believed private, access to files I'd thought secured, knowledge of movements I'd made certain were untraceable. "Impressive work," the lead interrogator commented, reviewing my financial forensics. "You have talents that could be useful." The offer was implicit but clear: cooperation or consequences. By dawn, I understood my options had narrowed to one. The skills I developed to destroy Brady, financial tracking, evidence building, strategic patience, were now assets these people wanted to utilize. "Consider it an opportunity," the man said, sliding several documents across the table. "Your husband betrayed you. We're offering partnership." The decision wasn't really a decision at all. I signed the non-disclosure agreements. I accepted the new identity documents. I boarded a private plane to a destination not disclosed until we were airborne. My revenge against Brady had been perfect. I'd taken everything: his freedom, his reputation, his company, his name. I'd dismantled his world with surgical precision and rebuilt it in my image. But in the process, I'd lost ownership of myself. Now, I work in an unmarked office building in a city I won't name, unraveling financial crimes for people who exist in shadows. I'm valued for my skills, compensated generously, and watched constantly. My expertise in destruction has made me valuable to people who specialize in it professionally. Sometimes I think about Brady in his prison cell, believing he'd lost everything to my vengeance. He doesn't realize we suffered the same fate, both trapped in cages of our own making, neither of us truly free. He laughed in my face and said I'd walk away with nothing. In the end, we both did. If this story resonated with you, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more tales of justice and its unexpected consequences. Remember that revenge might feel satisfying in the moment, but the price we pay for it can be higher than we ever imagined. What would you have done differently if you were in Tessa's position? Let me know in the comments below.